Warrior Poets! It's time for episode 4 of Warrior Poet Profiles, and this one we're doing the great George Washington. So as I've been studying it up, I realized down the street I have somewhat of a Revolutionary War historian. You're constantly reading on it. In fact, you've got all their official garb. This is kind of what they would be wearing.
As my wife says, go play.
That's an awesome accent. Good. So I have with me William Temple. He's a Revolutionary War reenactor. He's been doing this stuff for years. He's been a pretty big figure with the Tea Party movement, and so he's been on the major media networks. So CNN, Fox. You've been.
Carl Cameron's a good buddy.
There you go. You just got honored with, you'll be speaking at Trump's inauguration as Patrick Henry.
Yes.
Which is awesome. I also have a Time magazine right here. You didn't get Man of the Year, Mark Zuckerberg.
We came close.
If anyone's ever heard of this guy. But here you are right here. Oh, just trying to disarm me right up here, looking awesome. So anyway, that's awesome, man.
I would never disarm you, John.
Well, this is cool stuff. So
yeah, considering it takes 32 steps to load and fire it, I know what you can do with your pistol.
Yep. Mine's 3. Very good. Well, cool. I feel underdressed. Do you have any more of this stuff laying around?
I was about to say you're going to get pretty cold pretty quick. So
yeah!
Now you're in the spirit.
Yeah, very good. So I'm dressed as a Brit.
You are.
Fantastic.
Yes.
And this, what
the
is
wrong
this thing?
colors,
What is
actually.
this thing I've got?
Now this is your cartridge box.
So this is where they keep all their ammunition?
Right.
Okay, and so they would have been carrying something like a Glock 19 Gen 4, a T-Rex sidecar.
Oh, if we'd have had that.
You didn't have this? What else? What do you
We didn't have that right there.
No? So the idea with a warrior poet is somebody whose mind and body is occupied with protection of people, so they're skilled warriors, and then the poet aspect is removed by higher purpose or love for others. How is George Washington a warrior poet?
Well, he was a motivator of men verbally, and we have his speeches. Men responded to him. Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry and George Washington were probably the two most revered men among the colonials. But
why revered?
Revered because they one during the French and Indian War. He unfortunately led a militia unit that was all but wiped out by the Indians. Indians shot him, hit him 5 times, but they only went through his clothes, and the Indians began to think this man could not be killed.
That's awesome. That happened more in the Revolutionary War too.
Yes, it did.
So Martha would be like, "You've got more holes in your clothes,"
right.
Apparently.
Well, unlike today,
what a stud! What a stud!
And unlike today, generals actually would lead their men.
Yeah.
Wars into it a lot quicker when the generals start dying. But he also was a person who didn't quite understand the new military, because all of his troops would get down behind rocks and trees, and he rode along with his sword, whipping them with the sword, trying to get them to and yelling at them, "Stand up and fight like a man."
That's awesome. And he was a man. He was like 6'2",
yes,
athletic, very, very strong, and was kind of a mountain of a man. Red hair in his youth. And this is a huge hat. I feel like I'm a pope up here. This is a bear hat.
Well, the British wore those. The grenadiers of Europe wore them to impress people looking at them coming, because it made them look so huge.
Well, it feels.
And but of course, for the average soldier, they were your SEALs of that time. In that they were your shock troops, but they also tended to get shot down in mass.
SEAls. No, that's awesome. No, it's okay. It's okay. Good.
Washington wanted his troops to fight like the Europeans, and the Kentucky and Tennessee long riflemen and Virginia long riflemen who were fighting and using these squirrel guns, a lot of rifle guns. They had been fighting Indians, and they were used to getting down behind rocks and trees, and so when Washington was yelling at them to stand up and fight like men, they were like, "What's wrong with this man?"
So he was a man's man.
Oh,
he was
yes.
a ferocious warrior. He was a good tactician. He was a strong guy. Can you give me a little bit of a story, and our viewers, a story of kind of that, why he was revered, how he won that respect? Give me a story that kind of shows him as a man on a battlefield.
Well, he was a humble man as well.
Okay.
There was he was not self-seeking, and there were those in his army who wanted him, after he, instead of becoming president, they wanted him to become a king.
Yeah.
And he refused. He would not allow that to happen. And still, if you looked at him, he would be considered our greatest president. And he was constantly away from his home. And so Martha, and he had hard times. She was constantly under threat of being captured. But his love, he was a loving man. He was a man, a verbal man that could instantly gain respect. Even though he was a Federalist at the end of the war, Patrick Henry, who was a virulent anti-Federalist against the Constitution, revered Washington to his death. And the man could command soldiers, he could command respect, and he also picked the right men to serve under him, all of his generals. He did not like them getting into feuds, sure, and therefore wanting to go out and shoot each other.
Yeah.
So he opposed that. He was like, "What good does it do me to have generals if they're going to go out and get mad at each other and shoot themselves?"
No, that's
duels?
good. That's something I just did a warrior poet profile on Miyamoto Musashi in the 1600s for the samurai culture. Dueling to the death was just something that was
a man's honor was at stake. Yes.
Right, but just agree to disagree, and the country's got two good warriors rather than one.
Well, it was literally
anyway, yeah.
true. It was literally true that if you were called out by another man and challenged, and you did not respond,
sure.
you lost all respect. You would go nowhere in government or
Sure.
in the military.
Yep.
So it was expected.
Hence Hamilton and Burr, right?
Hamilton and Burr.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, cool. Let me think. What else?
So do you want to see the musket drill?
Not yet. No, not yet.
32 steps to load and fire it, you
No
know.
more Washington stuff. All right, so Washington also has his critics, especially in modern day now. So there's a movement really against founders. What are some of the common attacks that are done on, like slavery or anything like that? Speak to some of this.
Well, on religion, there are those who want to make him a deist. And at that time, the French Revolution was close. Even though they'd helped us in our revolution, they were bringing in deism and a belief that, as Patrick Henry said, was nothing more than atheism and immorality.
But some of the founding fathers were deists, correct?
Well, no. The only one that was a hard deist was Thomas Paine.
Okay.
And he sent a deist manuscript to Washington and Benjamin Franklin for them to approve. George Washington never talked to him again, although he had written Common Sense and Washington praised him.
Sure.
By the time he went to that, George Washington, and later Thomas Paine joined the French Revolution, was put in jail and was going to be executed.
Right.
And he wrote to Washington to save him. Washington wouldn't even answer his letters.
Wow. I'm of the opinion that some of the majority of our founding fathers were Christians.
Amen.
And then I also believe, and don't shoot me because he's better armed than me at the moment because I put my Glock away, that some of the key founding fathers like Jefferson, Franklin, and possibly Washington were deistic. And so I'm trying to sort through that. There's some clues that make me think that he was more deistic than Christian, but I'll defer to you who knows more. But right now where I'm in my studies, I'm more prone to say there was definitely some deists amongst the founders. Though you got guys like the great Benjamin Rush, adamant, sincere Christians. But even the deists had a respect for Bible that they're basing kind of the moral system on. So you mentioned, so sorry, because I don't want to make it all about religion.
Right.
It's a piece of who he was, but I want to get into some other stuff as well. You mentioned the French, and I know a real close friend, and people could say there would not be a United States of America without France coming in, and you had like the Marquis de Lafayette, who was instrumental, he was a Frenchman, instrumental to the revolutionary cause. Also Baron Frederick von Steuben, German.
Right.
So really, America's independence would go on and affect the world. So France's independence would precipitate from it. But really, the seeds of our revolution and the ability to pull off the revolution was largely tied to a lot of different influences outside ourselves. stuff. Is that fair? And do you
Well,
want to speak to it?
Yeah, we realized if we were going to ever defeat the British, we needed to be recognized by other foreign governments. So Adams, Jefferson, all went to Paris,
And
were,
how'd Adams do there?
huh?
How'd Adams do in Paris?
He did not do
He
well.
was awful.
No, and Jefferson was the smooth operator.
Sure. And
he knew
Franklin,
how
of
to
course.
play along,
Yeah.
and Franklin. But the difference was that our revolution was heavily dependent on an appeal to heaven. Matter of fact, that was George Washington's flag, appeal to heaven, and it's a flag with a green tree pointing up
Very good.
to heaven, and it was his belief that that God, and Benjamin Franklin, who also said that if God can notice a sparrow, when a sparrow falls, how do we think that we could not win this revolution without his aid?
Yeah.
And he was appealing them, don't give up on God. The French, on the other hand, took a whole barge of priests and sank it in the Seine. They were so anti-God. Voltaire, all of them were speaking against it. And
Speak to slavery now. George Washington had slaves,
yes,
right?
yes. Yeah. He was opposed to slavery, but he knew at that time, as did Patrick Henry, had 65 slaves by the time of his death. But both of them wanted the whole business to end. They felt that it was dangerous, for one, and they knew eventually there would come a time where the issue after gaining independence, where they could actually do it. The British, on the other hand, during the Revolution, were actually freeing slaves as wherever they went. They had already had a revolution in England,
Sure.
a peaceful revolution.
Wilberforce.
Wilberforce,
Yeah, that guy's an awesome.
and they
dude.
brought the slave trade. They were actually chased a slaver into Boston before the revolution started.
But if they believed that slavery was morally reprehensible,
Yes.
then why not free their slaves early? I know of the founding fathers, Washington would be the one that would free his slaves upon his death. He spoke against slavery in private, but publicly he feared that it would break the nation apart if he went on the offensive about it. Is that right? Doesn't that feel a little hypocritical to
Well,
you?
that Patrick Henry says, how can we be talking about all men are created equal in the Declaration?
A glaring weakness.
Yes, well, and he grew up in Virginia along with Thomas Jefferson, and they were all landowners. But in the South, many realized at that time that if you ever freed and armed slaves, because there were a sizable proportion, if you didn't do it, as it was said later, it took a long time to establish this practice. You can't just overnight declare it over and expect these slaves to be able to survive it in winter or whatever without the means
Got it.
to take care of themselves.
It sentenced them to death.
And plus, if the British armed them, you could have a massive slave revolt.
I'll suffice it to say I don't know enough history to cast judgment, but it's still just, let's say Washington, though he was an amazing man of moral character, respected by his own forces and the British alike. They call him a turncoat and didn't like him, but they still respected his moral virtue. Isn't that true?
Well, as so many Americans at that time, they were here from Europe. He had represented the crown in the French and Indian War. They respected him as they did Benedict Arnold. And as George Washington understood, Benedict Arnold, though we call him a terrible person today, he was driven into the British hands by our early Congress. They had a Congressman St. Clair who wanted his position and kept supplies.
And he was the real hero of Saratoga.
He was he saved the revolution the first year when the British were coming down through the Great Lakes.
Right. If he hadn't have stepped in that moment, we probably would have lost that momentum. It was what struck me, guys, is just in my personal studies is the revolution and all these men. It seemed like the revolution was constantly hanging by this delicate thread, where if one little piece and all these just myriad of different events had not gone just as so, if we hadn't have gotten that, then the revolution would have fallen to pieces. So there's this delicate balance, and so just to have the moral force and fortitude and courage to stay on when all just seems constantly hopeless,
Yes.
year after year, against the greatest, most powerful empire the world had known. You're this ragtag group of dudes freezing your butts off, quite literally. Their clothes would just disintegrate around them. They were walking around well over half the army was barefoot at one point, right?
Well, as an officer, I had things like boots. I had.
But the Joes, they were freezing, right?
They were wrapping their feet in whatever they could, and oftentimes bloody feet.
Yeah.
People don't appreciate that George Washington was after all the defeats in New England and in Valley Forge, starving, freezing, dying, people dying every day, that as soon as Valley Forge ended, most of his army had gone back. They felt it was useless. He was left with 1,700 men.
Down from 12,000, right?
Right.
Just a brutal winter.
Right.
Brutal winter.
And they had to go home, many of them, to feed their families who were also starving. The British were encouraging the Indians in the West to attack the settlements. So there was just so much going on. And so George knew they had to have something dramatic, or he would probably have been hung along with the rest of the founders. But he crossed the Delaware, captured the Hessians at Trenton, which was a real blow, and then General Gates's victory over the British coming down from Canada, and those, as you said, it was always nip and tuck, but the difference was that the Congress commanded the General Washington to make all of his troops go to church. Could you imagine that today?
No.
And to repent of their sins, and they had to do it. They were ordered by the government to go to church.
That's amazing. Now, the Congress also, though I'd look at something like that and be like, wow, that's a different moral standing Congress. It was hard to not get a grudge toward Congress as well. When Washington, it seemed like everyone was against Washington at different points, and we think that he was just this celebrated leader from the get-go, and he was, and then he became very unpopular. He was almost supplanted by General Gates, who just seemed like a snake in the grass.
He was.
And then Congress is not giving him money, they're not feeding the army, so he's got with no tools, with no provisions, with no money, with no support, with people back channeling him. It's like one man against the world. Some historians would call him the indispensable man, meaning if you remove Washington, there is no revolution.
Right.
And so
he was a man of faith, and he was always, in all the crises, trusting in God.
That's cool.
And that was what
and
also
suffering
inspired
with his troops as well. He felt like, he'd get a piece of bread and his men would go hungry, and somebody would ask him about it. He'd give him his only piece of bread and then walk off. And I'm kind of like, man, that type of...
Well, and this is the thing. We talk about the separation of politics and religion. They would have told you politics will tell you your religion, and religion will determine your politics.
Yeah.
They never saw a time where the American people would become agnostic. And they understood that the Constitution would be meaningless, would be a meaningless piece of paper if the American people ever lost their virtue and their faith in God. They understood that.
Topic for another day.
Yes,
That sounds,
yes.
Yeah, very good. Well, cool. Can I check out your rifle?
Yes, certainly.
Yes. All right, cool.
All right, take cover.
This is a
It's a
Daniel defense.
69 caliber,
That's awesome.
smooth bore,
Okay.
1739, Brown Bess. And nobody knows where the term Brown Bess, but they figured that was their second girlfriend.
That's awesome. And this guy?
That goes right on top. You
awesome.
just slide it on the lug, twist it.
Yep. All right.
And at that time, you had to fire 3 rounds in a minute if you were a good soldier, and then you charged. Guess who the most people were that died from the gun or the bayonet?
Oh, bayonet.
Bayonet.
Bayonet. Yeah.
And the British had perfected it. The idea was both lines drew up to 75 meters with each other, because that was the maximum effective range of a smoothbore. And even though they had rifle muskets, they hadn't realized the value of it. So they brought over, the British brought over the German Jaegers who had rifle muskets and placed them on either end of the line, whose main job was to do what they call rolling fire. Man would step up, fire at the cannon, the next man would stop, so keep constant fire on your artillery. And then the rest were using smoothbores in this long drill, but it wasn't, at that time, more people died from edged weapons like your sword or the bayonet. And the British were good in an open field, but what they found out from General Nathaniel Greene and Washington's men, that rifle muskets could start taking out your officers at 400 meters. So
That's awesome.
they were writing home to their parents to tell them about this terrible, wicked weapon that was causing havoc on the battlefield and leaving them without officers, which was just unbelievable that you would allow an army to function. So you weren't supposed to shoot officers, according to the British.
It's just not respectable.
No, that's not done.
I think I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, that's right.
Very good. All right, well, cool. Well, I wanted to thank you for allowing us to pick your brain. Really
Oh,
appreciate it.
What
and-
little is left of it, yeah.
Well, anyway, guys, train hard, train smart, and study history. There's lots of gold gems that can motivate us, inspire us even today. They speak.
Yeah,
See you guys.
can I get an AR-15?
Yeah, we'll talk. We'll talk. See you.
Take care. Shoulder your firelock. Join your right hand to your firelock. Poise your firelock. Join your left hand to your firelock. Half cock your firelock. Handle with cartridge. Open your cartridge. Spit. Prime. Shut your pan. Cast about to charge. Withdraw your load with cartridge. Withdraw your rammer. Shorten your full
rammer.
cock your firelock. My favorite command. Present. Put it in the barrel. Ram down with cartridge. Recover your firelock. Withdraw your rammer. Shoulder your firelock. Shorten your rammer. Shoulder your firelock. Replace your rammer.
Cool. That's great.
You taught us that. Cast off your
You're
firelock.
welcome. Here,
Your right hand
Ready?
under the lock. Poise your firelock.
garment. Establish grip. Draw firearm. Present. Shoot bad guy.
It's a very short weapon.
Yeah, we do what we can.
You can't hit anything in the distance.
Oh. Challenge accepted.
Fixed bayonets.
Yeah.